Hey guys, and welcome back to this Python 101 programming series. So in the previous video we had a look at variables, tuples, lists, strings, for loop to go through the list and the tuple to output their individual values, and an input so that we can allow the user to provide information for us. So I think in one of the videos, I think the first video that I did, I mentioned that, in my opinion, one of the best ways to learn how to program in any sort of language is to have an application or a program in mind that you want to write, and then kind of learn on the go, rather than picking out individual concepts and learning them there and then. I like to have an idea in mind and figure it out as I go, because I think you kind of get into the programming mindset and an algorithmic way of thinking, which is kind of what you need for programming. So with that in mind, what we're going to do for the foreseeable, or at least for probably the remainder of this series, is we're going to be creating a simple game. It's going to be a Naughts and Crosses type game, or tic-tac-toe, or however you want to say it. So what we will look at first is, well, in any sort of program, probably one of the best ways to start is to actually split it into sections, or parts that you need to create the game, or to create the thing, and then bring it together and make it as a whole. So what do we need for tic-tac-toe? Well, I'll create a multi-line comment. So the first thing we need is somewhere to store the game, the game board, our positions, stuff like that. So we need a game board, and so this is going to store our our noughts and cross, and it's going to allow us to display the game board as well, so we can see what's happening, kind of thing. So we've got that. What else do we need? Well, we need some kind of input. The input is going to be the user giving us an x and y coordinate for where they want to go. So, for example, 1, 1 will be in the middle. Again, we need a player, and what else? Well, we need a winning condition as well. And finally, we want to just loop through this entire thing until a winning condition has been met. So a win or a draw. So for this episode, I think we're going to focus on the game board and the user input, and we'll do the rest as and when we need. So, a game board. Well, let's have a think about Naughts and Crosses. There are 9 possible positions. Well, yeah, 9 possible positions. So why can't we just start with a variable called game, and let's say that a 0 is an empty place in our game board. So why can't we just try 9 zeros? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Why can't we do that? And then to output this, well, we learned how to do that in the previous video. We can do. Okay, well, I'll do it one way and then we'll do it a different way. So for row in game, print row. So this is now going to output. So we've got a little issue here, and the issue is quite simply that all of our values are being printed on the new line, whereas what we actually want are 3 by 3 by 3, or sorry, a 3 by 3 kind of grid. That's what we want. So we can solve that, but there's a few other issues that are not so glaringly obvious, and one of them is one of them is the actual type of game itself. So have a think, what is the data type of game? I'll give you a clue. We can't change anything, so even if we try game, let's say the 5th element in game is equal to x. Now PyCharm has highlighted this for us, saying that tuples don't support item assignment. So that's saying that A, game is tuple, and B, we can't use a tuple because it doesn't support item assignment, i.e. we can't change anything about it. Additionally, we can also doubly make sure by using print type and game. This will print out the type, the specific type of the variable, and as you can see, it's class tuple. So in the previous video we looked at tuples and another thing, tuples being a place where we can store bits of information, and a list which is which is a data type used for storing information. The difference between them is that a list can support item assignment, i.e. it can change, and a tuple can't. So we can change this to a list, and we do so by putting it all in a square bracket like so. So, and what I'm going to do is just make this look pretty by reformatting the file and make it pep8, or is it pep11? Is it pep8 or pep11 now? It's pep8. Okay. Pep, by the way, is I don't know what it stands for, but it's essentially Python's formatting. It's, you know, you have to make it look a particular way and make it look all nice and pretty, and it reformats it for you. So anyway, so that's the first issue, and as you can see now, well, let's try to change it. So game, let's say the fifth element in game is equal to x, and now we should see that we have indeed printed x out perfectly. So another issue that we're going to have is, and it's probably best if I actually comment this out, control / or backslash, whichever one, / I think, for PyCharm, and control KC for Visual Studio Code. So you might be able to see what one of the issues is by looking at this and saying print game. So this is going to print out this for us. If we print it, again, it prints out all in one line, but what we actually want is a 3x3. So 3 and then 3 and then 3, all on different lines. And the issue we have with this is that even if we make it look a bit more like a Naughts and Crosses board, what we actually have is a one-dimensional list. So if you imagine an x and y coordinate, what we have here is essentially just the x-axis. We don't have a y at all. So how do you think we can make this into a two-dimensional list, or a list of lists? That's probably how you're going to refer to something like this. Well, what we can do is simply put an additional square bracket there, another square bracket there, so now we've got two square brackets around them, and we can separate that out by putting more square brackets around this. Oh, and we're going to need a comma there and a comma there. So what this has done, we've now got one list, two lists, three lists. So we've got three lists inside a list itself. So you can imagine it as if your mum has ever bought some carrier bags from Tesco or whatever, and you've got one big bag, and then she puts lots of bags inside that bag. It's kind of the same thing. It's a bag inside a bag inside a bag inside a big bag. That's kind of the same thing. And what you'll find now is, if we run this, the first issue is we get this index out of range exception because we're using game. We're trying to change the fifth element in game. Now, what's actually happening is Python is saying, okay, you want to change something in the fifth row. And remember that, it's trying to find the fifth row. But remember, we only have 3 rows. We've got 9 elements, sure, but what Python knows is it's got 3 rows and 3 elements inside a row. So what this goes to is actually 0, 1 or 2. So if we try game 0, I'm going to get rid of the x because that's just going to change everything inside. So if we now do print game 0, and I'm going to get rid of that as well. So this is going to print out the first row in our game board, and then if I copy and paste, this prints out the second row, or at least if we put game 1 is the second row, and then finally the game 2, and there we go. That's kind of how we want our game board to look. Pardon me. Right, so we've got our game board, and we've got it as a two-dimensional list, and we're now outputting all of the rows kind of how we want our game board to look. Now the first obvious issue that we want to solve is to put this inside a for loop so that we don't have to have multiple print statements, and the second thing that we want to solve is to get rid of these square brackets and the commas, sorry. So how we did this before, what I'll do is I'll create a new list, so I'm just going to say new list, and we're going to say that the new list is equal to 0, 1 and 2, like so, and comment that out. So if we print new list, it's going to come out with 0, 1 and 2 with the square bracket and the comma. Now if we want to get rid of that, what we need to do is we actually need to access the specific element inside that list. So let's say we want the middle element, we need to put a 1 in, and it outputs a 1. And if we want to loop through this, we can say for item in new list, and then print new list, print item, sorry, there we go. And there you go. So I'll now just get rid of that. So although it's printed on a new line, we can sort that, don't worry, that's just a formatting thing. But we can see that it does get rid of the square brackets and the comma, I keep saying apostrophe. And this is the thing. What we need to do, or rather what's actually happening, is that the for loop, when we're going through this, it's outputting this row with the square brackets and everything. Then the for loop is going down to this one, and then it's outputting this one. So you might think that we're actually going around this game board to output everything, we're looping around it 9 times. Well, actually no, we're not. We're only looping through it 3 times, because it's going through the first row, the second row and the third row and outputting all of that. It's not accessing the individual elements inside the rows, and that's what we need it to do. So if I get rid of that and we go back to this, let's say I want the middle element, so I want this one. I'm just going to change it to a 4 in that case. We need to change that, and we need to add a second one. So what we're effectively doing is saying that's the row that we want, and that's the column we want. So if we then press play, we then get an individual element. So that's all well and good. But how can we actually translate that into a for loop that prints out all of this for us without the square brackets and the commas and everything to make it look pretty? Well, if we need one for loop to go through one index, and we've got 2 indexes, we've got an index X and an index Y, well, why can't we just add an extra for loop? One for loop to loop through the X part, one for loop to to go through the Y part. Well, it seems plausible. Why can't we do that? So we can try for column in row, print column, run, and there we go. So now what we have is our game board kind of outputted in a ish way that we want. The final issue is obviously we need these in well, we need it to look like an actual game board, Naughts and Crosses game board. Well, if you come in from like a C++ or C# background, you'll probably think that in C# or C++, you've got a statement and you need to explicitly say you want a new line. So if you're in C++, you'll use cout, and cout doesn't provide a new line for you. You need to use endl or you use an escape character. If you're in C#, you need to explicitly say console.writeLine, and that will give you a new line. Well, in this, Python automatically gives you a new line. You have to explicitly say that you don't want a new line, and you do that by adding a comma, end equals, and then apostrophes or quotation marks, whatever. If we run that now we're getting somewhere. It's on one line, which is good. Now remember, this row, it's looping through 3 times. This one is looping through 3 times, i.e. it's running, all of this is running through 9 times, which is what we want. But remember, this is going through the first row, and then this is going through the individual elements. So, for example, that would be row 0, and then we've got row 0, column 1. There we go, row 0, column 2, there. And then as soon as we've got to the end of the column, or the end of the final element in that row, then we're going to go down to here, and then back up to this for loop again, and the row is going to be 1. So, you might be wondering, well, if this is just outputting all 3 of them, all 3 elements in the first row, and then it's going to output all 3 in the next row, and then all 3 in the next row, why can't we just put a print statement at the end of this for loop to say, okay, at the end of the first row, just add a new line. End of the second row, add a new line. Well, we can do that. Print, and there we go. So now we're really getting it to look like a Naughts and Crosses grid, which is awesome. The final thing I want to add is a printf statement, and I'm just going to convert this one into printf by using f and then speech marks. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some curly brackets around column. Now, if you remember, curly brackets around something like this indicates to Python that it's not a string. In fact, it's a variable that we want to input into this string for us, or this output for us. And finally, I'm just going to put a space, run, and there we go. So this is now our Naughts and Crosses grid. We've got it all in a new line, we've got a little space there to make it look a bit neater, and additionally, we've finally... Ah, that's why. Sorry, I thought we were changing it, I forgot that there was a 4 there. Yes, and we've now got the ability to change an individual element inside any part of the game board. So, for example, if I want to change now the first element, I can write game x position 0, y position 0, or rather 0 is equal to x, like so. And then we can print it out again. So copy and paste, print, I'll put a new line, and there we go. And now we're able to change it, which is what we want. Because this is the x coordinate, that's the y coordinate. So, good stuff. And what's that? Oh, we'll get onto that in a sec. Okay. So, we've created our game board, which is great. We've displayed our game board, and we've kind of modified the game board as well. But we want, obviously, the user to be able to modify the game board for us. Or rather, we want them to modify the game board, so that they can play it. Well, how do we ask a user to input something? And how do we store that input? Well, we need a variable. So we're going to say row. I'm going to say row is equal to input. And then So what's wrong with that? Then we can say game, game row column is equal to, in this case, x. So PyCharm has come up with some highlights, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run it, because I think PyCharm's already figured out what the issue is, because there definitely is one. But let's see what happens. If I enter a row, I'm going to choose row 1, column 1. Right, we've got an issue. And it's type error. We've got a list indices must be integers or slices and not a stir. So a stir is a string. And the issue we've got is the output that, or rather, whenever the user types something from an input, Python automatically thinks that's a string, because it can't figure out if it's a float, if it's an integer, if it's a Boolean value. It doesn't know what it is, so it just automatically assumes everything is a string. You need to explicitly say, no, this is a string, or this is an integer, or this is whatever. So what we actually need to do is we need to cast this to an integer. We need to cast the output to an integer. Now, it sounds complex, but in Python it really isn't. Just put an int there, like that, an int there, like so. Now if we try again, I'll need to add this again so that we can actually see the output. In fact, I'll just move that down to here, run it, and then let's say 1, 1, and now we have ended the program, but there is no error, and we have indeed changed the correct element in our game board using our user inputs, which is fab. Fine, reformat file. And that's pretty much it for this video, because we're getting quite long now. There's only one final thing that I want to do, and this is more... it's not something that you're probably going to come across, definitely not in any of these tutorials, but it's something you might come across later down the line. And it's what PyCharm is highlighting at the moment, and it's unexpected types and possible types. What this is actually saying is we haven't explicitly said that this is an integer or something. So if we type in int : you can see that we get rid of the error. Now, in ordinary Python programming, this is never going to be a problem. But if you are looking at programming in Cython, which is I guess it's a superset of Python, but it's compiled to C, so it's incredibly fast, much faster than Python. It's compiled to the C programming language, which is one of the fastest languages that we have, I think. Apart from assembly, it's probably the fastest language currently available for use. So if you are going to Cython or something like that, then you'll need to put in things like int and then that to explicitly say this is an integer or something like that. You don't need, for ordinary Python programming, you don't need to do that. You can leave that as it is, and it will work, as we've seen, perfectly okay. And yeah, does PyCharm actually? No, it doesn't actually tell you kind of what to do with it. But yeah, so if you want to get rid of that error, or warning is probably a better term, you can just use int : and explicitly say that that's an integer, but you don't need to. It will work perfectly fine, no worries whatsoever. So that's the end of this video, and yeah, in the next video we're probably going to look at how we can change certain things. So you can see at the moment, if we try to play this now, you can see our game board is there, which looks nice, and our game board is there again. But we've had to use the exact same pieces of code to get that to run properly. So in the next video we're going to look at how we can change this so that it looks so that we're reusing code. Yeah, so stay tuned for that, and see you all in a while.